Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We would like to present about the soldering, but before that, let me introduce our group first. So, me, Muhammad Hadi Irwan Shah bin Abdul Halim, and follows with Nurul Najwa binti Azhar and Siti Nur Aina binti Muhammad Fazali. We were given a task to do a report in presentation slide, which is we are using the PowerPoint, and then we choose the topic of soldering. So in the soldering part, we will explain about the application of soldering, working principle of soldering, process, application, and others. So we will start our presentation with the abstract first. Alright, so let me start with the first slide, which is about the abstract. So I would like to share with you guys about the general information of soldering. So soldering is a joining process used to join different types of metals together by melting solder. So as you guys know, solder is a metal alloy usually made of tin and lead, which is melt using a hot iron, and then the iron is heated to temperature above 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which then cools to create a strong electrical bond, right? Next is as you can see in the slide. We were given task and we did it, and then we make some research. Later we will provide to explain to you guys, and then we do analysis about the soldering. We define the function of soldering, working principle of soldering, operation of soldering, and application. So in this presentation, we will explain to you guys. Alright, the content of our presentation 2 is we will also explain about how does this soldering work, what metal are used in the soldering, which flux can be used for soldering, types of soldering, which is we know there are 3 types: soft soldering, hard soldering, and brazing. And then the uses of a soldering iron, what is soldering gun used for, and the industry, which industry that use this type of soldering. Alright, so next is introduction. So I will continue to introduction of soldering. So as you can see in the slide, there is 6 points, which is connecting of metal, pin together of 2 parts, heated, cooling, generate connection, and plumbing, sheet metal fabrication, automated relators repair. Right, so I will start to how does it work. Alright, so solder is melt by using heat from an iron connected to a temperature controller. Right, so it is heated up to temperatures beyond its melting point at around 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which then causes it to melt, which then cools, creating the soldered joint. Alright, so as well as creating strong electrical joints, solder can also be removed using a desoldering tool. So it will make us to be aware, and of course it may help to avoid from any mistakes during soldering. Alright, so next is solder is a metal alloy used to create strong permanent bonds, such as copper joining in circuit boards and copper pipe joints. So there is a flux inside the solder core, which is the function is to strengthen and improve its mechanical properties. So right, so what metal that this soldering use? What metal are we use in soldering, right? So filler metals used in soldering were once lead based. However, owing to regulation, lead based solders are increasingly replaced with lead free solders, which may consist of antimony, bismuth, brass, copper, indium, tin, or silver, and many more. Right, So next is which flux. Initially I will introduce first about the flux. Which flux can be used for soldering? So, occasionally at the side of the joint, there are impurities such as oil, dirt or oxidation. The flux help prevent oxidation and can sometimes chemically clean the metal. Alright. So in addition, the flux used is rosin flux, which help the mechanical strength and electrical contact of electrical joints. And then sometimes it is also possible to apply a wetting agent to reduce the surface tension. So yes. Alright. So next is the types of soldering, which as you can see in the slide, there are soft soldering and hard soldering with the different melting point. Soft soldering, the melting point is 90 to 450 degrees Celsius range, and then the hard soldering melting point above 450 degrees Celsius, which is consists of silver soldering and brazing. Alright. So what is soft soldering? Right. So this process has the lowest filler metal point of all the soldering types at less than around 400 degrees Celsius. These filler metals are usually alloys, so often containing lead with liquidous temperatures under 350 degrees Celsius. Because of the low temperatures used in soft soldering, it thermally stress component the least but does not make strong joints. So this soldering does not make strong joints and is then therefore unsuitable for mechanical load bearing application. So next is it is also not suitable. It is also not suitable for high temperature use, as this type of solder loses strength and melts. Right. So what is hard soldering? Alright. So the hard soldering, for sure we know that more than 450 degrees Celsius. So what is the type of hard soldering is brass or silver. So we know that brass or silver is the bonding metal used in this process and requires a blow touch to achieve the temperatures at which the solder metals. Right. So next is the brazing. Same. The temperature is same, which is more than 450 degrees Celsius. These types of soldering uses a metal with a much higher melting point than those used in hard and soft soldering. However, similarly to hard soldering, the metal being bond is heat as opposed to being melt. So once both the materials are heat sufficiently, you can then place the soldering metal between them, which is melts and acts as a bonding agent.
Next is flux. What is flux? Flux is a chemical cleaning agent used before and during the soldering process of electronic components onto circuit boards. In this slide, we will go through the function of flux during soldering. Firstly, it removes metal oxide to support wettability of solder. Next, the coat metal surface is to prevent from reoxidation. Flux also reduces the surface of tension of solder to allow it to spread onto pad or lid. Lastly, flux makes the surface finish smooth of solder. Next is material has been used in soldering process. Firstly, we have soldering iron, solder, PCB, which is printed circuit board, electronic component, which are diode, resistor, transistor, capacitor, and lastly, long nose pliers to hold and cut the legs of the electronic components. We move to the basic step of soldering method. It starts with the plug and preheat the soldering iron. Using a long nose pliers, bend the legs of an electrode component such as resistor or diode to fit into the holes on the PCB. Next, solder with the preheated soldering iron by carefully contacting the tip of the iron to the copper surface. Heat up the region to be soldered. Next, allow the solder to flow into a peak style and ensure that the solder flows onto the joint rather than around or beside it. as soon as possible after soldering the joint may be cooled using a water spray or air blast. After soldering, we must identify the good and bad soldering joints. Bad joints tend to have dull solder and round shape, and good solder will have shiny solder and volcano shape. These are the types of the shape from perfect to bad soldering. Next, we move to the soldering defects. There are a few soldering defects, for example, crack, breach, lifted component, flux residues, and non-wetting. There are causes of soldering defects, which are the speed of iron, the movement were too fast or too slow. The direction next is the direction when releasing the iron tip is wrong. Furthermore, the amount of solder is not applied correctly. And lastly, cold joints, because not preheat the iron tip completely.
Next, we move to the precautions at soldering station. First, wear safety glasses to protect eyes. Check the temperature before start soldering process. Next, fix the holder and check the iron tip and make sure to check the water quantity in sponge. Always keep the working table clean. Last but not least, must have the correct posture to have clear view of work, thus feeding in wire and iron movement smooth and easy. Next, we move to the application of soldering. Solder is a metal alloy that is used to form strong permanent bonding such as in circuit boards and pipe joints. It's available in two sorts and diameters, lead and lead-free. The flux which is utilized to strengthen and improve the mechanical properties of the solder core is included within it. Due to the reduced power of irons, soldering guns are utilized for situations requiring additional heat. This instrument is used to solder stained glass, light sheet metal, and heavy electrical components together. The soldering gun is significantly more useful when you need to solder sporadically because it cools much faster. So, we move to the advantages of soldering. Lowering the temperature is the first step. Temperatures about 400 degrees Fahrenheit are needed for soldering. Welding, on the other hand, necessitates considerably more heat. Wrapping does not occur during the soldering process. The metals link don't melt or distort because solder flows at lower temperatures. Even if the person soldering makes mistakes, they keep their original size and shape. Solder then acts as an electrical conductor. To link the electrical connectors together, solder flows between them. Solder conducts electricity because it is made of metal. Multiple connections can also be made by soldering. Multiple connections are made with a single operation on circuit boards floating in a molten solder bath. Solder only adheres to the components, not to the board. Finally, it is simple to learn. Soldering does not necessitate any special abilities. Easy to follow instructions can be provided on various websites for soldering electronic components, plumbing, and jewelry. This is the disadvantages of soldering. When a joint is working at a high temperature, soldering is not a good idea. This operation cannot weld heavy metals, and there is a risk for hazardous components in fluxes. Finally, it is ineffective for welding over vast distances.